who was the first documented engineer. Yep, Robin may have even touched on it earlier on, I'm not sure. Who was the first documented engineer?
Imhotep.
Imhotep. Yep, so the first engineer known by name and achievement is Imhotep. And this is not by some private research amongst the brothers and sisters. This is according to Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay? And all civil engineers will know this. Imhotep, of course, he wasn't just the first engineer, he did lots of other things which I'm sure many of you will be aware of, including poetry, music, etc. High priest, he was a advisor for one of the pharaohs, as well as physician and so on. And he was from the southern part of Egypt, known as Nubia, effectively a Nubian. So if we have any doubt as to what type of Egyptian he may have been, he was a Nubian. Okay?
Black.
He was black. Okay? But the thing is, history books sometimes try and disguise those things. But the reason why, again, the reason why I may broach that question, because if you're a young child aspiring, wanting to be an engineer or an astronaut, and you're thinking, well, people like me don't do things like engineering. Well, in fact, the first engineer, the very first documented engineer, was just like you. So that's sort of a base point. And similar with medicine. If you do your medical degree, you have to take the Hippocratic Oath. And of course, Hippocrates, who you give this oath to, he effectively gave his oath to Imhotep. Imhotep existed many, many, many years before Hippocrates, for example. So let's go on to a not so famous quote. See if you can tell me who said this quote. I'll read it if you like. There is a somber point in the social outlook of Americans. Their sense of equality and human dignity is mainly limited to men of white skins. The more I feel an American, the more this situation pains me. I can escape the feeling of complicity in it only by speaking out. So, this is somebody who's presumably gone to America or lives in America and has observed certain things and said, this is not right. This whole, constitution seems to be geared towards men of a certain skin colour as opposed to humans generally. Any idea? Any guess?
Marcus Garvey.
Marcus Garvey. Not Marcus Garvey.
I'm biased.
It's not Frederick Douglass.
It's not Frederick Douglass. Okay, shall I put you out of your misery?
Yes.
Albert Einstein.
I couldn't remember.
Okay? Albert Einstein, he was actually the chair or vice chair of the Anti-Lynching Society in the 30s and 40s. He was actually on the FBI list for many, many decades. They were sort of following him. And for many years, he actually was a recluse in the sense that he did not want to give any more public talks. But he did agree to give one talk, or at least, he started to agree to give certain talks, and one of which was at Lincoln College. And here he is giving a lecture to the African Americans at Lincoln University, which was one of the early black colleges, for example, because he was passionate about, he saw that racism clearly wasn't fair, and he saw no reason for it, and he was quite an advocate of it. So here you have a scientist who was commenting on race. And now we'll go to Marcus Garvey's quote, who is, let's call him a race analyst, or who's commenting on science. And this is what he said about science. This is what Marcus Garvey said about science. In your homes and everywhere possible, you must teach the higher development of science to your children, and be sure to develop a race of scientists par excellence. For in science and religion lies our only hope to withstand the evil designs of modern materialism. We're coming up to sort of 90, 100 years ago, and this is what he said to his people at a UNIA address. So, we could ask, why was Einstein so passionate about wanting to address the issue of racism in America, and why was Marcus Garvey quite passionate about wanting to teach, or wanting black people to be knowledgeable in science? Okay, so these are the things we're going to sort of examine and explore in this session. Before we do, let's dispel some myths. I mean, what does a typical scientist look like? If you were to take the media, how scientists are portrayed in the media, you might think of a sort of a senior scientist like that, okay? And perhaps when they're in their mid-career, they look something like him, off Big Bang Theory, Sheldon. And perhaps if you know, the person at school who ended up doing science looked something like that. Okay, this is the media. This is what the media tries to say. We're not saying we expect them to look like male models or possibly women of colour. But the reality is, those guys are actors. Okay, they're actors. This guy actually was a former tutee of mine who actually does have a physics degree, but he's now a Calvin Klein model all around the world. He got spotted in South Kensington during London Fashion Week. And this lady, Robin mentioned her earlier, Maggie Adarin Pocock, she was also got a physics degree from Imperial. She then went on to do a PhD in mechanical engineering. She then went on to design systems that go on satellites, that go into space, as well as doing a lot of science communication work. So again, it's slightly geared towards youngsters, but you know, many of you will be parents or know of parents, and it's important to know that you know, even though the media has a narrow spectrum of what a typical scientist might look like, especially a physicist, the reality is that if you want to know what a typical scientist looks like, just look in the mirror, because anybody can be a scientist, absolutely anybody. There is no barrier in that sense. As a slight aside, if you may be wondering how I kind of got into science, I'm sort of preempting, I wouldn't say there was a specific turning point, but there was one incident I remember at school which did change my approach to science. And I suppose I took a negative, sort of, and turned it into a positive. When I was about 14, there was a chemistry lesson. We did some tests, some chemistry tests. I wouldn't say I was particularly studious. I would say I was typical of young boys in our community at the time. I liked to laugh and joke and so on. But we did this chemistry test, and somehow I got the top mark in the class, and the teacher was reading it out in reverse order. Now, it was a surprise to me, it was a surprise to the teacher, but what I found most surprising was that there was a lot of boffins, you know, the usual boffins who always get top of the class. They were disgusted to see a guy like me getting top marks. In fact, one of them even asked the teacher, could he remark my work to check that he actually gave me the right score? And so it was at that point that I thought, oh, why not? Why can't I do it? I've got a brain, you've got a brain, I can read, you can read. What's the difference? Why is it that you must do better than me all the time? So I ended up battling with them, not just, and then it spilled over into other subjects, just generally. And so I've kind of kept that slightly rebellious attitude. It could be the fact that my parents are from Jamaica, I don't know, but I've kept that slightly rebellious attitude that says, no, if you're going to put me in a box, I'm not going to go in there, because that's not how I'm designed. Yeah? And so I kind of battled with them to prove that I could. And then obviously over time, you do actually, I think I really got into the subject when at degree level, really. That's when I actually started taking a real interest in it and thinking, oh, this is quite interesting, or certain aspects of the degree was interesting. But again, that was something whereby I think it reminds me that when you're at school and people, you know, teachers have expectations of you, your peers have expectations of you, and they want to put you in certain categories. And as parents, you have to kind of remind them, you know, remind your children that you can be whatever you want to be. It sounds obvious, it sounds cliche, but you'll be surprised how many sort of can be affected by what their peers, what their teachers think. There was a time when, do you remember that time where they had O-levels and CSEs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was in that year when they was changing things, sort of, and there was a time when the teacher, you had to do a test, and this was for English. You had to do a test, and if you got above a certain mark, you'd go into O-level set, you know, the top set with all the nice people. And if you got below a certain mark, then you've got to go into CSE. And again, the teachers would call you up individually and tell you what you got and where you're going. And I was on my, you know, he called me up, and I'm walking there, and he's looking quite disappointed, quite upset. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I failed. How did it happen? And he actually said, Mark, you've scored whatever it was, 55, 60, I don't know what it was, but you've scored above the threshold, so I'm going to have to put you in O-level. But I had you down for CSE. That's what he said to me. And I was like, why is he so disappointed? Not quite understanding what it meant until... Well, that was England in the 80s. Fair enough, I grew up in the Midlands, so it's possible that maybe London wasn't quite as blatant, but nevertheless, these again were things where, you know, you you could easily be made to feel that you don't necessarily, and don't forget, English wasn't my great subject, it's just that I didn't feel that, that I should just do badly because people expected me to.